They were not simply warriors. They were instruments of a system so ruthlessly engineered, so deliberately constructed from birth, that the civilizations they conquered didn't just lose battles, they lost the will to resist entirely.
At the height of their power, the Aztec Empire stretched from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific Ocean. Over 5 million people lived under its authority. 80,000 square miles of territory, held together not primarily by loyalty, but by something far more effective.
The Aztecs understood something that most empires only discover too late. The most powerful weapon in the history of warfare is not a blade or a bow. It is memory. The memory of what happens to those who refuse. This is Hidden Doctrine, and today we go inside the most formidable military civilization the ancient Americas ever produced, and we uncover the doctrine that built it.
The Aztec warrior was not made on a battlefield. He was made the moment he entered the world. From birth, Aztec male children were consecrated to conflict. The rituals surrounding their arrival were not celebrations of new life. They were initiations into a lifetime of purpose. The umbilical cord of a newborn boy was buried with weapons. The message to the child, encoded before he could speak, "You belong to war." As boys grew, the training began in earnest. Food was restricted, deliberately, to build not just physical endurance, but psychological resilience. Hunger was a teacher. Pain was a curriculum. The goal was not to produce soldiers who were unafraid of suffering. The goal was to produce warriors who had already suffered so deeply, for so long, that the battlefield held no new terror. The most successful military civilizations in history have always understood this principle. The warrior is not forged in combat, he is forged in preparation. By the time an Aztec soldier faced an enemy, he had already defeated the hardest opponent he would ever meet: himself. By the 13th century, the Aztec civilization had evolved into something that had never existed before in Mesoamerica: a true imperial machine. At its core was a city, Tenochtitlan. Built on an island in the middle of a lake in the Valley of Mexico, it was an architectural marvel that rivaled anything in the contemporary European world. Its causeways, aqueducts, and floating gardens fed and connected a population larger than most cities on Earth at the time. But Tenochtitlan required fuel to survive, and that fuel was tribute. Every city, every territory, every people absorbed into the Aztec sphere of influence was required to deliver, regularly and without negotiation, crops, textiles, precious stones, featherwork, and human beings. The tribute system was the circulatory system of the empire. Interrupt it, and the empire began to die. And to ensure that never happened, the Aztec military existed for one primary purpose that distinguished it from almost every other army in history. Aztec warriors were not primarily trained to kill. They were trained to capture. Because the empire's gods demanded something that gold and grain could not provide. They demanded living sacrifices. And without a constant supply of captives, the cosmic order, in the Aztec worldview, would collapse entirely. The sun would stop rising. The world would end. War, for the Aztecs, was not politics by other means. It was theology in action. In 1502, a ruler named Moctezuma II ascended to the throne of Tenochtitlan. Intelligent, calculated, and utterly merciless when challenged, he immediately set about expanding what was already the greatest empire the Americas had ever seen. But expansion required obedience, and obedience, occasionally, required demonstration. In the southern region of what is now the Mexican state of Oaxaca, a collection of Mixtec towns under Aztec authority began refusing to pay tribute. Their defiance was quiet at first, a withholding here, a delay there. Moctezuma sent emissaries to address the situation diplomatically. The city of Tututepec murdered them, all 100. Their bodies were left on the road as a statement. Moctezuma's response was not anger. It was arithmetic. He assembled a force estimated at 400,000 warriors and marched them 300 miles south. The people of Tututepec, understanding what was coming, frantically constructed 5 walls of stone and brick around their city. They built fortifications. They prepared defenses. It made no difference. The Aztec forces swept through the walls, burned the royal houses, and proceeded with systematic destruction. According to surviving accounts, everyone above the age of 9 was killed. Hundreds were taken captive and marched back to Tenochtitlan. The message was not sent to Tututepec. Tututepec was already gone. The message was sent to every other city in the empire, watching from a distance. This is what rebellion costs. Generations would remember. That was the point. For 200 years, the Aztec Empire operated as a near-perfect system of controlled dominance. No civilization in Mesoamerica could challenge it militarily. No rebellion had succeeded. No enemy had penetrated the causeways of Tenochtitlan. Then, in 1519, something arrived on the eastern coast that the Aztec war machine had no training, no doctrine, and no precedent to handle. Hernán Cortés landed at what is now Veracruz with a force of Spanish conquistadors. They carried steel, a material that shattered obsidian weapons on contact. They rode horses, animals the Aztecs had never encountered. They carried firearms that produced thunder and death from a distance no warrior could close in time. But Cortés understood something critical. He could not defeat the Aztecs alone. What he possessed, and what Moctezuma's system of terror had inadvertently created, was an entire continent of peoples who harbored centuries of resentment toward Tenochtitlan. Every tribute extracted, every captive taken, every city humiliated had quietly built an alliance waiting for a catalyst. Cortés became that catalyst. By the time he marched on Tenochtitlan, he commanded tens of thousands of indigenous warriors from peoples the Aztecs had dominated for generations. The final siege lasted 93 days. Steel blockaded the causeways. Spanish brigantines cut off the lake routes. Food and fresh water stopped reaching the city. And then came the weapon no Aztec warrior, no matter how hardened, had any defense against whatsoever. Smallpox. The population had no immunity. It moved through Tenochtitlan not like a disease, but like a verdict. Tens of thousands died before a single battle was fought. Warriors who had endured years of deliberate suffering, who had been trained to conquer pain itself, had no answer for an invisible enemy that killed them in their homes before they could raise a weapon. In August 1521, Tenochtitlan fell. The greatest empire the Americas had ever known was erased in less than 3 months. History tends to tell the story of the Aztec Empire as a cautionary tale, a brutal civilization that met a brutal end. But Hidden Doctrine asks a different question. What does it mean that a civilization this sophisticated, this militarily dominant, this deeply organized, was completely dismantled not by a superior culture, but by a combination of biology, alliance building, and timing? The Aztec warrior was, by any objective measure, among the most formidable fighting forces ever produced by human civilization. trained from infancy, motivated by a cosmological belief system that made death in battle not a tragedy, but a distinction, operating within a military apparatus that had conquered every opponent it had ever faced. And yet, it fell. Not because the warriors were weak, but because the system that created them had also created the conditions for its own destruction. A continent of subjugated peoples with nothing to lose, and a foreign invader offering them a reason to fight back. Every empire in history has made this same miscalculation: that terror is a permanent solution, that memory serves the powerful forever. It never does. The shadow of the Aztec warrior still stretches across centuries of history, culture, and identity in Mexico and beyond. The temples still stand. The calendar still fascinates. The stories are still told. Not because the empire survived, but because what it built and what destroyed it mattered. Power that demands blood to sustain itself has never, in the entire history of civilization, survived the accounting. The Aztec Empire lasted 2 centuries and ruled millions. It was dismantled in 3 months. History does not lack for empires that believed they were permanent. It lacks for empires that actually were. At Hidden Doctrine, we don't just tell you what happened. We ask you why it keeps happening and what it means for the civilizations being built right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter of Hidden History is already being written. And leave your answer in the comments. Was the fall of the Aztec Empire inevitable, or could it have been prevented? I want to know what you think. The doctrine was never hidden. It was just waiting for someone willing to read it. End card. What ancient empire do you think deserves more attention from history? Drop it below. Our next script might be about it.